And the little dragon learned that being different didn't mean being less. It meant being wonderfully, uniquely himself. 27-year-old Vesper Lowell closed the picture book gently, her voice still carrying the warm cadence of the story as 4-year-old Caspian sat across from her at the library's corner table. His sightless eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder, a smile lighting his small face. It was their ritual. Every day after preschool, Caspian's caretaker would drop him at Riverside Public Library, and Vesper would read to him until his father's driver arrived for pickup. "Again?" Caspian asked hopefully, his small hands reaching across the table to touch the book's textured cover, fingers exploring the embossed dragon he couldn't see but had learned to recognize through touch. "We've read it 3 times today already, sweet boy," Vesper said gently, covering his hand with hers. "How about we try a new story? I found one about a brave knight who was afraid of the dark." "Like me," Caspian whispered, and the simple honesty in those 2 words made Vesper's heart ache. What most people at the library didn't know, what Caspian's wealthy, distant father certainly didn't realize, was that Vesper had started staying 2 hours past her shift every day, unpaid, just to read to this lonely child. She'd noticed him that first week, dropped off by a rotation of different nannies who never stayed, picked up by silent drivers who barely acknowledged him, and something in his careful politeness and quiet sadness had broken through her professional boundaries straight into her heart. Vesper understood loneliness. Her father had died 3 years ago, leaving her and her mother struggling financially and emotionally. She'd taken this library job to help with bills while her mother recovered from the grief that had nearly consumed her. They lived simply, carefully, every dollar accounted for. But Caspian's need felt more urgent than her exhaustion, more important than the extra tutoring work she could have been doing. So she stayed. She read. She described illustrations in vivid detail so Caspian could build pictures in his mind. She brought textured books from home, created tactile story experiences, taught him to love narratives through sound and touch and imagination. What Vesper didn't know was that for the past 3 weeks, 33-year-old Holden Caspian Ashworth, tech industry millionaire, grieving widower, and profoundly overwhelmed father, had been standing in the library's doorway listening. The first time had been accidental. He'd arrived early for pickup, heard his son's delighted laughter echoing from the children's section, and followed the sound to find this young librarian reading with such animated passion that Caspian was literally bouncing with excitement. Holden had frozen, unable to remember the last time he'd heard his son laugh like that. Since his wife Celeste's death during childbirth, Holden had been running from grief, from guilt, from the reality that his son's blindness had been caused by complications during delivery, from the unbearable truth that looking at Caspian meant facing everything he'd lost. So he'd hired excellent caregivers, provided every resource money could buy, and maintained careful emotional distance, because love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain he couldn't survive again. But standing in that doorway, watching this stranger give his son something he'd been too broken to provide, presence, patience, genuine affection, Holden felt shame so acute it was physical. He started coming early deliberately after that, listening from the shadows as Vesper read stories, answered Caspian's endless questions, described sunsets and butterflies and all the visual beauty his son would never see. She never rushed him, never seemed annoyed by his repetitive requests for the same stories, never treated his blindness as a limitation. "Miss Vesper?" Caspian asked one afternoon, his voice small and uncertain. "Do you think my daddy wishes I could see? Is that why he doesn't like to be with me?" Holden's breath caught painfully. Vesper was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, I think your daddy loves you so much it scares him. Sometimes when grown-ups lose someone they love, they forget how to show love to the people who are still here. It's not your fault. It's never your fault. You are perfect exactly as you are. Seeing or not seeing doesn't change how wonderful you are. But he's always working, Caspian whispered, his voice small and uncertain. The nannies say I'm high needs. That means I'm too much trouble, right? No, Vesper said firmly, and Holden heard her chair scrape as she moved closer. It means you're a 4-year-old boy who deserves attention and love and people who show up for you. You're not too much of anything, Caspian. If anything, the world doesn't give you enough. That conversation shattered something in Holden. That night, he did what he should have done years ago. He called a grief therapist and began the painful work of actually processing his loss instead of running from it. Over the following weeks, as Holden worked through his trauma, he also started paying closer attention to the librarian who'd been loving his son in the ways he'd been too damaged to manage. He learned she worked multiple jobs, that her mother was recovering from her own grief, that she stayed late unpaid because she genuinely cared. And he realized that money hadn't bought his son what he needed most. It had been freely given by someone who had very little materially, but infinite compassion. One evening, Holden finally stepped into the reading area instead of hiding in the doorway. Vesper looked up, startled, and Caspian's face lit with confused hope. "Daddy, you're early." "I am," Holden said, his voice rough with emotion as he knelt beside his son's chair. "And I owe Miss Vesper my thanks. She's been taking care of you in ways I should have been." Vesper started to protest, but Holden gently interrupted. "I've been listening, for weeks now, hearing how patient you are, how you make stories alive for him, how you tell him he's perfect when I've been too broken to say it myself." His voice cracked. "You've been giving him something I couldn't, presence without pain, love without the weight of loss. And I'm grateful and ashamed in equal measure."
"Mr. Ashworth, I'd like to hire you," Holden said. "Not as staff, but as, I don't even know what to call it. Caspian's companion? Reading specialist? I'll pay you properly, far more than you're making here, to keep doing what you've been doing for free." Vesper's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like disappointment. "I don't spend time with Caspian because I want payment. I do it because he's a wonderful child who deserves someone to show up for him." "I know," Holden said quietly. "That's exactly why I'm asking. Not to replace your kindness with a transaction, but to honor it by making sure you don't have to sacrifice your own needs to meet his. Let me remove the financial pressure so you can keep being present for my son. Please." What emerged from that conversation was an arrangement that transformed all their lives. Vesper became Caspian's dedicated companion and educator, finally able to quit her exhausting side jobs and focus on creating rich experiences for him. But more importantly, she became a bridge between father and son, gently teaching Holden how to be present, how to read to Caspian himself, how to describe the world through touch and sound. Holden learned to overcome his grief enough to truly see his son, not as a reminder of loss, but as a person deserving love. And Caspian, for the first time, experienced his father's presence and affection. Slowly, carefully, they built a relationship, with Vesper's patient guidance illuminating the path. 6 months later, in that same library corner where it all began, Holden sat with Caspian on his lap, reading the dragon story in his own voice now, still a bit halting, still learning, but present and trying. Vesper sat nearby, ostensibly organizing books, but really just watching this family heal. When Holden finished, Caspian touched his father's face gently, exploring the smile he could hear in his voice. "You sound happy, Daddy." "I am happy," Holden said, his voice thick, "because I finally stopped running from loving you. Miss Vesper taught me that." Vesper's eyes filled. "I just read him stories." "You showed him he mattered," Holden corrected gently. "You saw a lonely child and chose to care when you had every reason to walk past. That's not just anything. That's everything. Because kindness doesn't require wealth or credentials or perfect circumstances.
It requires noticing who needs us and showing up, reading stories past our shift, staying when we're tired, loving when it costs us something. And sometimes that simple choice to care transforms not just one life, but an entire family, teaching broken hearts how to beat again, showing distant fathers how to draw close, proving that the most valuable things we can offer each other can never be purchased, only freely, generously given.
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.